Welcome back to TinyBlueGames. My name's of course Seesaw or Chris, and today we're doing another MMO comparison video. Today's video will focus on mounts in different MMOs. We'll be talking about World of Warcraft, The Elder Scrolls Online, Guild Wars 2, and Final Fantasy XIV. Now, just before we get into the actual comparison, I wanted to talk a little bit about my background with the MMOs we're going to be discussing, because the more time you spend with a game versus another one is going to shape your opinion of the game. So just looking quickly back at my MMO history, I've probably played the most amount of World of Warcraft, about 5 years, not in a row, but over an extended amount of time. Second would be Guild Wars 2, and then Final Fantasy XIV, and finally The Elder Scrolls Online, which I've played for really just half a year, so I have the least amount of experience with that. The flip side of this, though, is in the past year, I've probably played the most Final Fantasy XIV and The Elder Scrolls, and then Guild Wars 2 and World of Warcraft are trailing in the back. So it is a little bit of a flip there where I have more recent experience with those games, but I've played them less overall. The final piece to this puzzle is that I am a ArenaNet or Guild Wars 2 partner. Does this mean I won't say anything bad about Guild Wars 2? No, I love saying bad things about Guild Wars 2. I love saying good things about Guild Wars 2, but with any game I try to do a good balance of pros and cons when discussing any subject. It's just important that you know that going in. It also does mean that there are 2 sponsored links in the description. If you do want to give Guild Wars 2 a try, either the free version or buying one of the expansions, and you do use one of those links, it does help out the channel a lot. Finally, in a lot of these type of comparison videos, I like to do a poll to get a feeling of what you guys think about the subject. As I mentioned in our last video that focused on classes and roles, the feature to do polls in videos has been removed from YouTube. However, I'm thinking of trying, in this video, a Google Forms or Google survey. You'll find the link for it in the description, right near the top-ish, I guess. And you can go ahead and try that. It's like a 5-question survey, so it should be really quick, and it does allow me to ask a little bit more information, which might make the results even more interesting. I do hope to share these results in either a future video or a future post on the channel, so if you do want to see that, make sure you're subscribed to not miss out on it. We're going to start today's comparison with Guild Wars 2. There's no real rhyme or reason for this, I just kind of wrote them down in a certain order, and we're just going to stick to that, because that sounds good to me. So Guild Wars 2 mounts have kind of been added pretty recently still to the game, and it's kind of an interesting thing because a lot of people did not want mounts when they were originally discussing adding them. A lot of people thought it would take away from the game. A lot of the game is focused on exploration, jumping puzzles, that kind of stuff, so people really didn't like the idea of just being able to run through everything or fly over things, and there was a lot of just negativity at the start of this. And what we've seen since then is that people have really loved how Guild Wars 2 has added mounts, because they did do mounts very differently. And I'd say out of the 4 games we're going to talk about here, Guild Wars 2 is probably the most different in terms of how they do mounts, and you're either going to like it or you're not going to like it right away. And I know people of both sides of the spectrum who either love how functional they are, or they hate it because it doesn't work like mounts in World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV. So we'll talk on that in just a second. But just to get a base idea, each mount in Guild Wars 2 is designed for a very specific function. And there are a lot of mounts in the game, and they keep adding them throughout the updates, which is really cool because you're always interested to see what they're going to think of next. The issue with this is that you'd think eventually they'd run out of, specific problems for a mount to solve. You can only have certain mounts that, jump over cliffs, or certain mounts that fly in different directions. Eventually, you're going to have mounts that kind of do the same thing as another mount, or they do a certain thing as another mount, but they do it way better, so the other mount is no longer used. And we do kind of see that where there are specific mounts that are probably used 90% of the time, and certain mounts that get used very rarely just for the very few circumstances where you'd actually need it. So I'm not going to go over every single mount that the game has available because there's quite a few of them now, and I also don't actually have all of them unlocked. They do take a little bit of time to unlock them, specifically if it's for a type of content that you don't play a ton of, such as the World v World mount. I don't play it very much, so it would take quite a while to unlock, and even then I don't do it very much, so it's not a good reason for me to have that mount. But you can see from the background footage that there is still quite a diversity from the mounts that you will get just by playing through the Path of Fire expansion. You've seen kind of the raptor that has its longer leap, you have the springer that'll jump up, you have the jackal that can go through portals of sand and can kind of teleport. You have the gliding over water, which is pretty handy, or this dangerous stuff that kills you, which is pretty nice as well. And then you also have the griffin, which is kind of a bonus mount that was added to that allows you to fly away, and you can actually mount that in air, which is really cool. Since then, we've had a few other mounts. We've got the roller beetle, which I unfortunately don't have yet. We have the sky scale, which I don't have, but you can actually try it out in the map, which is pretty cool. And these kind of serve different functions. The roller beetle is really, really fast, but is kind of harder to maneuver unless you're pretty cool at drifting. The sky scale goes vertically a lot higher, whereas the griffin goes a lot faster horizontally in the air, so kind of the two sides of the coin. And then we already mentioned the Warclaw in the World v World scene. So there are quite a few mounts to choose from, and they do serve specific purposes. The one side of this, though, is that you only kind of get the base look for each of the mounts from the game. I don't know at this point, but I'm pretty sure that there's no way to earn skins for these mounts in-game. They're all purchased from the gem store. Now, to be fair, you can convert gold from in-game activities to gems to buy them, so you can definitely get these skins without ever spending real money. It's just unfortunate there isn't like a specific achievement for each of the mounts, maybe tied to different types of content, that would give kind of a cool look. So that would be really cool, because these skins themselves are really, really cool. Not only do they look super unique, but they can be dyed, and you can really, really play with how your mount looks way more than most games. So it's really, really fun to just explore with what your mount can look like. So we're going to move on to the Elder Scrolls Online. The Elder Scrolls Online is also quite unique with their mounts. They're the only one of these 4 games that does not allow any kind of flying, I believe, unless I'm very misinformed about what I can do in the game. But yeah, you're pretty much locked to the ground in traditional horse manner. There are other types of mounts that look different, but they are functionally the same mount. So it's at this point we're talking about just skins, and I believe that's the same for most of the other games, that it's mostly a skin thing where the functionality doesn't matter as much. There is little functional pieces in each of the other games, and we'll talk about that in each game respectively. In the Elder Scrolls Online, you have the ability to kind of upgrade your mount, and this is done through a stable master. Each day you can go and spend 1 point to upgrade your mount, either the speed, the carrying capacity, or the stamina, and these help in different ways. The most obvious one is the speed, you go faster, but the other two can have their different uses as well. But it's kind of unfortunate because this is, once again, time gated. So every day you have to go in and you have to log on your character and you have to put a point into this until it's maxed. And that sounds pretty bad, but once you realize that this is per character instead of per account, you all of a sudden have quite the chore. A lot of people recommend new players make their alts right away and go on each day and just put their points into their mount so that they're ready to go when they do end up playing on them. Otherwise, you're going to be in quite the shock when you go from your main character who has a fully done up mount and you start using a mount that's starting at 0. So it's a bit unfortunate that way, but it is kind of a cool way to upgrade your mount to be better at specific things. In terms of different mount styles, there are quite a few different styles in the game, but these are essentially just different skins or costumes for the same type of mount. Like, they all move like a horse, right? They're gonna go the same speed. They're not gonna fly all of a sudden or do crazy leaps or different maneuvers. So they're all the same mount with just different skins. The good thing is that there are a couple of them that are earned in game from different achievements. There aren't a lot of them that are earned that way, but there are a few, and it seems like they've been adding them more and more as the new chapters come out, which is good. There are, of course, some in the Crown Store that you can purchase. They're pretty expensive, but they do look really cool. Like, there's some really different looking mounts, which is really nice. And you can, of course, in this game, trade gold for crowns. However, there is no official transaction method, so you do have to do a fair bit of work to find someone to trade gold to get gifted the mount. So it's a lot more messy than these other games where you can just trade it through some sort of transaction process done by the game. But there is that ability. Finally, you do have the ability to kind of engage with the mount when you're actually using it. There is sprint in the Elder Scrolls Online, and you are able to sprint on your mount, which consumes stamina, so you do get to kind of balance that. You also have a specific rapid maneuver skill that you can use as part of kind of their world PvP line, but you can use that everywhere, which does give your mount some more speed as well. So once you have this, once you have sprint, once you have the max mount speed, your mount actually can move a lot quicker than when you very much started the game and didn't know a lot about this. So there's quite the difference between someone who has unlocked all this versus someone just starting and hopping on their horse. So it's pretty cool that way, but it's kind of scattered all across the game, but it does give you some functionality when you are on the mount. This brings us to Final Fantasy XIV, and just before I get into this, the one big thing I need to say about Final Fantasy XIV is that there is a big change coming soon that will allow flying in specific A Realm Reborn areas. A lot of people said I should wait to do that, but my kind of rule whenever doing these comparison videos for MMOs is that the games themselves are always changing. For instance, I had a character creation video that I did a couple months ago, and when doing that, I knew that World of Warcraft was going to do a complete overhaul in Shadowlands, and I was like, oh, I should really wait for that. But I'm like, that's kind of like half a year away, and by then, I'm sure one of the other games is going to have a complete overhaul. So it's one of those things that you can't just wait, because everything's always changing, and that's one of the most beautiful parts about MMOs, is that there is that constant change, but it does make things tricky. So just know that there is that change coming to Final Fantasy XIV, but we will talk about how mounts typically work as they are right now. So I saved Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft to go last because they do treat mounts fairly similarly, though there are some specific differences that we'll get into. The big things though is that there are ground mounts and there are flying mounts. In Final Fantasy XIV, you start with a ground mount, and kind of the mount of the game, if you will, like not a horse, is a chocobo, which is kind of like a big ostrich-like bird, and they're super cute, and you get rewarded one, and not only are you able to ride it, eventually fly on it, but you're also able to fight alongside it as a companion, which is really cool. So that's kind of another added flavor. It is only the chocobo mount that you're able to fight with. I'm pretty sure you don't get to have any of the other random mounts as a companion, though I'm not an expert at Final Fantasy XIV, as you saw at the start of the video. So that's kind of a cool thing. You're able to kind of select different skill paths to go down. As always, there's one that's better than all the others, and it's not the skill path I chose right away, but we're working on that. And it's just a really cool, unique feature of the mount. You are able to also decorate the chocobo with different hats and stuff like that, and it's got its own little saddle bag. It's a really cool added depth to that one specific mount. So with flying, it's kind of something that you unlock for specific regions in Final Fantasy XIV, and this is done by doing sort of a collection of sorts. You're collecting aether currents. Some of them are just found on the map. You have kind of a compass that helps you find them. Others are unlocked through quests. I'm pretty sure people have mentioned that you unlock the ability to fly in the map when you kind of get to the point where you're done the story steps in that map, which is kind of nice, and it's fairly similar to World of Warcraft, though World of Warcraft is a bit more restrictive, and we'll get into that in just a second. The last part of this is that there are obviously a ton of costumes and different looks for mounts in the game, tons of them to be earned through achievements in-game that you can just play and find them. Other ones that you can purchase off of their shop, which is cool as well. And the biggest thing, and I believe this is true, is that every single mount that can be rode on the ground can also be a flying mount. The chocobo, the very first one you get, you have to do kind of a quest to get to that point, which I didn't realize right away. But yeah, I've been told that every single one can actually be used as a flying mount as well, which is pretty cool. Finally, we are at World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft has really changed how they deal with mounts as times progressed. I mean, obviously they didn't have flying mounts right away. Eventually they did, and eventually they limited how quickly you can get to flying mounts. There's a whole big sort of discussion there, but we'll start at the start of it. Mounts at the very start used to be one of the hardest things to save up for. They were quite expensive, and one of the biggest gates to get the mount was being able to save up enough gold to purchase it. And that was true for me as a new player all the way up to Lich King, where it cost a fair bit to get sort of like riding in different skies and stuff like that, different mount speeds, and like it cost a fair bit of gold for a new player. As time's gone on and the economy is inflated in different ways, I don't think that's necessarily a big thing anymore. You do purchase the mount skills and stuff from vendors, so it is still kind of part of it, but the bigger way that mounts are locked is behind specific achievements, and this comes really into how flying mounts are locked when new expansions come out, and the beautiful or dreaded Pathfinder achievement. So this has been the thing for the last few expansions. It's something that we've dealt with in Battle for Azeroth. I'm not entirely sure how or if things will change in Shadowlands. There's probably information out there, but I'm really going to focus in on the way it was treated in the most recent expansion, because that kind of gives you a good feel for how the game is playable right now until the Shadowlands expansion releases sometime in the future. But when the expansion released, there are Pathfinder challenge or achievements that you can sort of complete, and once you've completed part 1 and part 2, you unlock flying in the new expansion zones. Now you can fly in other zones from past expansions, so that's not limited. You can kind of fly around main cities and stuff like that. You can ride your mount on the ground anywhere, so that's still part of it, though I believe the Pathfinder achievements do increase the speed in the new zones as well. But the big thing here is that the achievement to actually unlock flying wasn't added into the game for some time after the expansion release. So it's not even the fact that you have to do the achievement, it's that the achievement or part 2 of the achievement isn't in the game until they kind of decide, okay, it's been enough time now, people should be able to fly. As with anything, there are kind of two sides to a decision. The good part of this is that it does force people to explore on the ground and really feel the way the environment works in new zones. Like, that's obviously where this change is coming from. The downside is that it just takes so long to be able to use flying in a game where flying feels really, really fun. A lot of people kind of just get irritated that they're not able to use their cool flying mount. It is also the fact that the achievements themselves, although they're made easier eventually, are quite the achievements to get in terms of reputation. So there's definitely a little bit of grind associated with it. And I know a certain amount of friends of mine that have just not gotten flying because they're like, hey, I'm already done doing what I'm going to do in the zone. I've already finished the story at this point. There's no real reason for me to get it. The exception to this being if you are someone who's going to use your mount to go and gather, that could become useful throughout the entire length of the expansion, so that's pretty fair. And that kind of leads to the final point about these mounts, is that they don't have necessarily much functionality when you're driving them. Like, they make you faster, they make you fly, but there's not specific skills. However, certain mounts do have certain functionalities. Like, some of them will allow you to walk over water, some of them allow you to gather herbs while while you're still flying and mounted, and some of them allowed multiple people on them. Like there's a bit of functionality that way, and that actually goes the same for Final Fantasy XIV, that there are mounts that allow multiple people on them and stuff like that. So there is a light amount of functionality, but it doesn't have the same active functionality that Guild Wars 2 and to some extent the Elder Scrolls Online has. In terms of aesthetics or just looking cool, there are obviously a lot of mounts in World of Warcraft. A ton of these can be earned in-game through doing different achievements from different drops and stuff like that. There are, however, certain ones that are locked in the cash shop, or certain ones that you get if you sub to the game for a certain amount of time. So there is kind of a variety that way, but I would say the larger portion of the mounts are available in the game. Alright, there you go. Just a brief overview of the mount systems in the different games. I know there's a ton you could talk about if you really wanted to. I'm sure you can make your own kind of like full-length video on each game and its mount system, but I feel like this is a good broad way of kind of comparing them amongst the MMOs. If I did forget anything, please do mention it in the comments below. It might simply be something I forgot to mention, or I'm kind of new at some of these games, so I could very well be learning something myself, which is always really exciting. If you do want to share your thoughts, I did mention at the start of the video that there is a survey link in the description below. Go check it out, leave your feedback, and we'll feature it sometime in the future. If you liked this video, toss it a like, and if you want to see more of this content, more of the results from this type of content, be sure to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community. But yeah guys, thanks for watching.